So good to see you, Maria.
Good to see you, Sabina. Yeah,
And yeah, I'm happy
glasses
to have
on.
this conversation with you today about all things awakening.
Thank you. Yes, very interesting topic.
Mhm. Which brings me
So,
to the first question. Like, there's so many ideas floating around what awakening is. And what would you say? What is your definition of awakening?
yeah, that's quite a tough question. Because I don't feel I have a definitive definition of awakening, in as much as I don't see it as a definitive state or destination, if you like, which is a change from how I was thinking about it a long time ago before I did embark on this awakening process properly. Um, and I think many people do see it as like a state or a final destination. Um, and so did I, and it's always a surprise, I think, to go through the process for people, because whatever you think it's going to be like, it's not probably going to be how you thought. That's my so just to give that sort of umbrella, um, I suppose I could define it in terms of what I see in terms of the process, in that for me it was a process of eliminating or losing the projections that caused suffering for me. And that's how I saw it playing out with other people's process as well. So I went through a particular methodology. In the end, I had a Buddhist background, but then I went through a particular set of unfettering process. So looking specifically at the 10 fetters in Buddhism and how to um, lose these illusions. And it's a very stepwise process, um, addressing all the self-referent illusions and also the underlying projection tendencies, if you like, for trying to compensate for the unrealistic expectations that I put onto life, or my experience of life rather. Um, yeah. So I mean, someone I know described awakening in a great way. I think they said it's not an awake state, but more like no longer being asleep, without the opposite thing of being awake being true either. Because being would imply being, and as we know, it's not about identity, um, but the opposite. And yeah, awake might imply a state that's temporary, whereas the most amazing thing for me about the awakening process is that you can actually have irreversible changes in perspective, which actually do not just temporarily relieve suffering, like profound meditation can, um, or, be putting yourself in particular conditions, like a sort of monastic setup or retreat setup, um, but can actually mean that you no longer suffer. Um, that will need some unpacking too, because that doesn't imply, life is always going to go as we prefer, for sure. We know this, right? We know it, but do we? I think that's one of the unrealistic expectations. I think that, we're going to achieve some state where we always feel good. Um, and that's certainly not the case. For one thing, there's aging, there's illness, there's just life not always going as I prefer or we prefer. And I certainly feel some of the effects of aging, and I certainly feel some of the effects of yeah, I don't always feel good, but I think the point being, I don't have to react to that, and um I don't have to resist that. And therefore, well, it's like it comes back down to the first arrow, second arrow teachings, which you might have come across, the Buddhist idea that, um, it's not that we can avoid pain, but we can avoid adding the anguish and rumination and all the rest of it that we normally add to the to whatever pain is present. So yeah. And for me, I mean, it felt like a process of continual, freedom, added freedom actually. And at the same time, maybe as it's worth stressing how ordinary it is as well, because it's an elimination process, if you like, of um all the things that we normally add on to experience falsely. It's more like stripping away, taking the wool off our eyes that we've put there in the first place. Or maybe it's like a series of distorted lenses instead of lenses to make things clearer. It's like we've put on all these lenses that actually distort what's happening, and so you're taking off, well, in this stepwise fetters methodology that I engaged in, you're taking off one by one, really. Not always one by one, sometimes more than one in one. But you're taking off, yeah, stuff that's meaning, well, it means you're no longer imputing all this false meaning that you're layering, that you've layered onto experience in the first place. And yeah, I mean, you could also call awakening acceptance, but that's a tricky word because it does imply a dichotomy of, acceptance versus non-acceptance, as if you have to swing between one, or, have one or the other. And it's not acceptance in a in that way. I think it's a full acknowledgement and non-fighting with the fact, we don't have the complete information on anything. So it can't be known or knowable. These are the things that we crave, from life. Except in very conventional terms, we can know what the normal signs and labels for things are, and we can engage with life. It's not that, we're living in complete chaos. It's like you can interpret signs and so on, but you're no longer imputing, that this is a known, knowable, tangible, permanent thing. And yeah, acceptance too, that life is not always going to go as we prefer, and we won't always feel good. Yeah, basically, we're not going to find a safe place of reliably knowing we will feel good, and that's okay. I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's kind of my definition. Um, the main thing I see.
Mhm.
And also I think awakening means, which was a surprise to me, that seeking stops. I'd been a seeker for years and years, decades, and had assumed it was a really difficult thing, if not mission impossible, really, to wake up, maybe involving lifetimes and lifetimes. But seeking does stop, in the sense, it's not that you're no longer curious in life, or have no interests, or have no responsiveness, or have no other things that you can develop and improve. Certainly I think sometimes there's healing to take place from personal conditioning, for example, for a lot of people, it seems. Even after taking away the main illusions, there's other kinds of conditioning than illusory conditioning, if you like, which I'm sure you'll know about because of your line of work. But yeah, you don't. I think one underlying thing seems to be seems to be that there's no longer a need to fix what is happening and showing up. What is happening no longer seems wrong. There's no feeling of a need to try and control what is happening.
So,
And that has a, that is profoundly changing
mhm.
to previous life experience, as I'm sure you can also relate. Yeah,
Yeah, you see me nodding. I
I
can
do.
absolutely relate. So, yeah, I love that you made it clear that this is not a single event, no constant experience, that it is a process. I can relate. I see it the same way. And uh, I saw you bursting quite a few bubbles that people have about awakening.
Oh, really?
Some exalted state of all-knowingness or whatever. And but on the other hand, it's for me the beautiful takeaway from your answer is that there is an end to suffering. There is an end to clinging and to searching. So
Yeah.
it might be different than what we expect it would be,
Oh, yeah.
but it is a possibility that can be lived in daily life. So beautiful answer. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So knowing that that since it is no single event and it is a process, it's probably not so easy to pinpoint where it all starts. But maybe you want to share a bit about how this process unfolded for you, because people are very curious to know more about how can awakening look like, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's hard, it's hard to know where to start with that one, isn't it? Because you can go all the way back to like my teenage years where I was in an existential crisis and depression and looking for the meaning of life and and trying to see that there was a reason to live. And I stumbled upon Buddhism and some texts that I could relate to as being the truth. Now that burst I burst the bubble of there being such a thing of the truth later. But at the time, it was very profound for me to see that there was a path forward, that there was a way, because I had looked at psychology, and I mean, I hadn't explored psychology as a teenager yet. I hadn't had therapy or whatever, but I'd certainly encountered that often motivator for spiritual paths, which is called suffering. It was some people do come to this as people who don't particularly relate to suffering. It's more that they are wanting to kind of, I don't know, do something different. But for me, it was definitely motivated out of that. And there was a long process of being involved in a Buddhist group and trying to, well, I thought I was signing up with ordination for, awakening. And that's what we were all endeavoring to do. Um, Without going into any particular critique of the community I was in, I found it useful to some degree, and obviously I wouldn't have stayed with it for a long time, but the point being, I think that you can only really speculate what awakening is about when you're not awakened, and um, you can go on all sorts of uh, by roads and routes, different routes to try to find this thing, find this way. And my way had involved, I guess, trying to find a process of awakening through meditation initially and through, I don't know, friendship, through various routes that could take, could help on a human level for sure. And I'm grateful actually for the meditation experience in terms of it, allowed me to know how to focus. Um, some of the looking I did later with the fetters methodology involved very focused looking and a certain persistence, which I don't think I would have been able to bring to the table, if you like, without having had some personally some meditation experience, although I know it's not crucial, it's not necessary for everybody. um Given that you're always looking in everyday ordinary awareness, you don't have to look in a special meditative state. um, but yeah, I think I'd exhausted what I could do within that particular pathway that I'd been on for years, and I realized it was like I had a really, really visceral sense in the end of what I was left with. I was suffering less, but I was still completely self-referent. I could feel how everything that happened in life had to somehow be processed through this central um, sorting system or self-referral system. And I got thoroughly fed up with it, actually. I was bored with myself. And it felt like a burden I was carrying around, like this, the albatross around your neck of self. And I wanted to free of it, actually. I did experience it in the end as a burden, but I couldn't find a way to address it. And I tried various things, including Tonglen. I don't know, you've probably heard of the Tibetan practice where you supposedly exchange self for other, and you haven't heard of that one. Anyway, yeah, it's one of those things that supposedly addresses what's called self-clinging, I think, in the Tibetan tradition. I'm not sure. But again, it didn't work for me. And then by absolute chance, I heard about Liberation Unleashed, which is a website addressing the illusion of self. And I think it equates what happened there for me within the space of about 3 weeks was dropping the self illusion, which is the first equivalent to the first three fetters, yeah, of self and of doubt and of rites and dependence on rites and rituals. And yeah, this was the first time I had, it's not that I hadn't had many insights or intuitions about there being no self and so on, but this was where the penny really could drop, and it never came back. It's like that was it. It really was profoundly gone. It's like never to return. And it was such a strong experience that I actually temporarily didn't experience the next two fetters, desire and ill will, for couple of months. I sort of had a honeymoon period with seeing through self, where I thought, oh, this is it. I thought I was enlightened, actually, because everything was, I was equanimous. Everything that normally bothered me was like water off a duck's back. I think it had been such a break with conditioning that it temporarily suspended other conditioning, or something. I don't exactly know how it worked, but I've since heard that people can have a kind of honeymoon period like this where they even don't react to anything, and then that usually comes in later. It comes back, the reactive bit, not the self, I am a thinker, I'm an experiencer, all that. I am this and that, which is what the self-illusion amounts to. You feel like you're the experiencer, the thinker, the doer, the agent in your life. And when that bubble bursts, you've still got the other layers, actually, of, for example, reactivity, where you're trying to push and pull at life to make it work like you feel like it should. And if it doesn't, you have this necessity to, do something about that. Whether that's kind of something you long for, that's why it's called desire and ill will, or it's split into two fetters, which is seemingly different things, but they're two sides of the same coin. It's either you're longing and for something that isn't possible, or you're fighting something that is happening or happened. You don't like how you feel about it, basically. So yeah, after shall I pause there? Do you got any question there?
Yeah, well, first thing is that I hear that a lot of times that there's these honeymoon periods. I had them myself too.
Yeah,
And what I love is that there is such a clear falling away of the self illusion for you. So so doubtless. So my path
totally.
is
Yeah.
completely different. So that's
Ah,
very beautiful to see how clear the understanding and the experience was about that. And I also love that you while talking about your unfolding, a little bit about the fetters, so that people who don't know of them get a feel
yeah.
for what this might be about. So yeah, go ahead. Curious to hear what's coming next.
Yeah. Now, what you're saying actually does prompt me to say that I don't think that the methodology I went through particularly is for everybody necessarily. And I don't think that's how everybody gets there. It is definitely a universal possibility to, it is a human thing to be able to wake up. And um, people do definitely, I've definitely met people who go through different routes, including completely spontaneous awakenings, which I think some of your experience was probably completely spontaneous as well. Um, and yeah, and yet for me, it was particularly useful because, as I said, I'd gone through decades of trying this, trying that, and yeah, banging my head against a brick wall in effect. So to find a way through was liberating and life-changing for me, and I definitely benefited strongly from this particular methodology and try and help others do that too. But I know it's not the only way, right? Um,
Yeah, but it's good. I think it's important and good for people to hear that it is a possibility for everyone in this lifetime,
oh
because
yeah,
traditions don't make it sound like it is. So good to
yeah,
stress that out. It's possible. And and
yeah,
how did that path continue from there on? So there was a honeymoon period and there was no reactivity, and then it came back. So what?
yeah. Well, I don't think it had really gone away, but it suddenly erupted again, and in a bit of a spectacular way. I got upset with somebody, who I was very close to. In a way, it seemed like more upset than I'd ever been, but it wasn't that. It was more like it was more obvious to me that this reaction was a reaction because I didn't have that sense of identifying in the same way that I might have had before, but it was still a real reaction, that I couldn't deny. And um and so initially I wondered if I'd sort of gone back and lost my initial, but then I realized, no, I haven't. That is clear. It's like, but I'm reacting. And then I was very lucky to be friends at the time with Kevin Shanilek, who was at that point, he's now developed a whole 10 fetters guiding or self-guiding methodology. Um, but at the time, he was kind of stumbling in the dark through his own process. Um, and just at the time that I was discovering I suffered reactivity still very much and was very far from what seemed like the enlightenment that I thought had happened. Um, I I heard from him that he was going he'd guided himself through reactivity. He'd already done this, and he hadn't yet gone through the whole thing himself, but he was finding it through the scriptures. He was able to read Sanskrit to Pali and get the clues that maybe the tradition that we were both in, actually, the Buddhist community was not au fait with this particular pathway, let's say. And he offered I could be a guinea pig among other people um, for trying to guide other people. And I subsequently learned that I took an embarrassingly long time through the reactivity illusions. Some people were much quicker than me. It is one of the toughest parts of the self-referent illusion, is what we've discovered, really, and it usually falls in We thought it fell in two parts, like weakening, then breaking. And subsequently to that, learned, well, actually, often there's a series of weakenings before there is a break. It's one of the unusual illusions in that it's particularly, uh, well, I don't know, it's got very big roots. Let's say it's kind of, it's like one of those plants you've got to really get the gardening equipment out for and spend some time on.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, it's
so
particularly sticky.
yeah,
And
a
and
good, yeah.
that's
And he guided me. So, yeah, very kindly guided me. And then I took a whole year out after weakening desire and ill will, which it did feel profound in itself to not react so frequently, so intensely, so long term. Took reactions much more lightly. But I was still reacting. And so, yeah, I actually took a whole year's break in between in that process and then came back to it because I found it really painful to address my reactivity. Um, and it also triggered stuff to do with childhood conditioning for me, which was um, quite a difficult childhood conditioning in some respects. So, I think it varies for people who are looking at reactivity, how easy or not easy that is for them.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then,
and I can relate that reactivity is can be uh, one factor that makes you bounce back in and out of realizations and experiences, and that's one of it's the one thing that makes people doubt, have I lost it again? You know, am I
yeah,
back to ground zero?
can
So,
do, yes. Mm.
mhm. Yeah. And with that reactivity falling away, that's what I experienced too, was a great freeing and a great lightness even after that.
Oh yeah. I think, it's funny because when with the first illusions, I thought, oh my goodness, this feels like getting out of prison. And it did, like getting out of prison. But in a way, it was nothing compared to breaking with reactivity. And because that really felt like like, I don't know what percentage, but massive percentage of human suffering went right there, you know. Um, and that's not to say that it cured. I mean, I had further suffering arise further into the fetters process, and then actually some trauma coming up from childhood, which really hit me at one point later down the line. But just that very thing of I've got to react to all everything I've always reacted to going was like a massive step out of um, the conditioning I'd experienced all my life, really massive. Um, and I found the second half, if you like, of the fetters, the higher fetters, much easier to go through after that. Um, Surprisingly, they were much quicker because, for me anyway, surprisingly, because the big hurdle for me had been the desire and ill will. So, and also, the views of what it would mean. As a Buddhist, I had lots of ideas of what I would be like, or like you'd have a halo around your head or something, or you'd be a different personality, or you'd be nice. And some shocking aspects out of desire and ill will falling for me was that I became quite assertive, and I actually started becoming really outspoken at one point, and um that displeased a lot of people, particularly in the Buddhist community I was in, because I was a little, I suppose I felt free of fear for the first time in my life. I could say what I really felt and thought about things, and I had been someone who wanted to please and not rock the boat. And I also think I had female conditioning around that as well. Like, it's impolite to say, well, no, that's not true, or I don't think that's good idea, or you know what I mean. And so to lose that, I think initially it was a bit rocky because I wasn't used to that level of inner freedom, if you like. If you want to call it inner, which there isn't, but but you know what I mean. So I didn't necessarily act very well at times. I made some big mistakes, actually. I was rude to people as well, which I regretted some of the things I did and said, but it was this feeling of, well, my opinion's as good as anyone else's opinion. And um, because I wasn't used to being that outspoken, I didn't really know how to modulate that for, for society, if you know what I mean, to make it sort of more palatable or diplomatic or, you know, um, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, I guess, if things burst out of constriction, they're often a bit volcanic as well. They're not necessarily very smooth.
Yeah. And another bubble bursted like you will be uh all loving,
Oh,
light emanating, always in a good mood, always soft spoken. I
mm,
actually experienced the same thing, that I was very people pleasing, and then
yeah.
suddenly, I was just making, getting my point across, and I'm like, ooh. So yeah, yeah, can relate very much.
You can relate, yeah. I used to get shocked at myself. It was like I was sitting there typing something or even speaking to someone face to face, and I think, do you have to say that? Yes, I do. There was this initial thing of like getting over the inhibitions that had been there all, I think it was a bit disinhibiting at first, like I say, and yeah, a bit of a shock. And not just to the people I knew, but to myself as well. Yeah. But yeah, I think I remember that was one of the things I was saying to Kevin was like, oh, but I was expecting to become this nice person. And
Mhm.
I think so. Well, sorry about that.
But I find that very useful for people to hear individual experiences because, like I said, it bursts all the bubbles and brings out the all the possibilities, all the twists and turns, and how unique this process is to each individual. And that we stop modulating it into some ideal or whatever,
Mm,
um, which then creates so much self-doubt and pressure. So I think it's
mm,
very useful and good to mention.
yeah.
So,
Oh, good. Yeah.
mhm,
Well, because I did have these strong religious expectations, of a sort of almost like what it would look like to be free of various illusions. I mean, for example, in the tradition in the community I was in, there was an expectation that if you went through the first fetters, like just the self-illusion, that you would somehow have perfect morality at the end of the day. Now, I soon discovered how unrealistic that was because there was still very at that point very crude reactivity in place as well. There was no way that I was going to be perfect in my communications or behaviors. And I don't believe in perfection, by the way, or but you know what I mean? It's like a sort of even an improvement at that stage is not realistic. Um, but then yeah, you can have all sorts of religious ideas, rites and rituals or speculative teachings that say that if you're, I don't know, an arahant, or if you're this or you're that, you would behave in this way, or you would live like this, or you would look like this, or you would, you know, um, and you realize, well, these are all, you know, ideas.
mhm,
Um, but it's not that doubt didn't dog me all the way. I did have those kind of, you mentioned doubt, doubting the process. And I felt like I had a little man on my shoulder the whole time that was doubt personified, if you like. Like I did personify it in the end as this little man in a three-cornered hat, who'd appear and say, you can't. you can't possibly have gone through that illusion. No, you can't. Not you, as if there was a me, fundamentally, you know. Um, and in the end, I got quite good at spotting it. And I'd say, well, thank you for telling me that. And uh, I'm just going to carry on anyway.
Mhm.
So I found a way of actually, I had to kind of find a way of relating to this doubt and working, continuing even with the doubt until it finally did dispel. And yeah, doubt can be a big hindrance otherwise, I think, for people.
Yes, and some people are more prone to doubt than others, so it
Yeah.
can be a big thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think people either externalize the doubt, like they doubt the process and therefore give up, or they internalize the doubt and think it's their fault, you know, that they can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And people are very willing to blame themselves, it seems. I mean, I think that's in a sense what happens in many religious communities. It's like they see a teacher saying, well, this is what it should be like, and then they can't seemingly do it. What and then think the fault is there rather than thinking, well, I've not been given a helpful roadmap here, you know, and you can certainly lose faith in the possibility of doing it at all
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
And
And
then,
you mentioned like that the higher feathers were much easier and shorter for you. And for
yeah,
some people, they are very they freak them out, you know, when perceptions change and the idea of time and space dissolves. So I'm curious to hear how that unfolded for you and why it was so much easier for you. So let's have a look at the higher feathers then.
yes, yes. I mean, I might have given a wrong impression earlier in saying, well, it was easier in terms of time and in terms of ease of process to go through higher fetters, as they're called, which are to do with subject, object, illusion, perception, as if you have this kind of magical vantage point on things and everything's situated in time and space and you know, the inner outer thing of the I exist, the final illusion, if you like, proper illusion. I mean, in some ways it was very more challenging to go through them than it had been desire and ill will, which was a relatively crude reactivity thing. But it's just that somehow it was more challenging to go through the higher factors and scary, but it was actually a smoother, quicker run for some reason for me to do that nevertheless, even though it's just in comparison, desire and ill will took years for me, which it doesn't for everybody. And Fetish 6 was quite pleasurable actually to go through and quick. It was the subject object illusion and you know, that feeling of you being center stage in a world of objects that all revolve around you kind of thing. And that falling away. It took a while to see what I was supposed to be looking for with that illusion because it was much less self-evident. You know, with reactivity, it's obvious. Everybody knows when they're reacting, more or less. But with the higher fetters, the difficulty can be knowing exactly what you're looking for. You're looking because it's less conscious as an illusion. You don't even know you're doing it. You're doing it. You've been doing it automatically, it seems, all your life, you know. And it just seems that's normal to see the things that way, to relate to the world that way. And so I found half the art with this one was clarifying often with Kevin and what exactly am I supposed to be looking for here? Because what you're doing with any fetter is trying to look for something that you assume is there, even if it's unconsciously assume it's there, and then look for it. Um, to see if you can find it. And it's only in that real looking for it as if it's a real findable thing that you experientially disprove it, if you like. It really, oh, you know, so you really look for it. You don't just come with the concept, oh yeah, there's no such thing as subject. It's like you try and exaggerate even the sense of subject object polarization in order to break with it. You exaggerate it in order to see better how you're creating it, how you're creating that projection. Similarly with the other fetters, actually, because like with reactivity, it's almost like you provoke the reactivity by providing a sentence of something, you know, some fact you don't prefer, that you don't like. With subject object, it's more like you're looking for, you know, where's the processor then, the central processor that's always, you know, everything seemingly is coming. It's a relational illusion. So it's as if everything has to bounce back into here, into the subject to be processed. So you look for the processor, you look for the distinguisher, you look for that thing that can do that thing with this world of objects. And then when it fell, it was actually very pleasurable when it fell. It was a bit like, I can relate it to past experiences, say taking ecstasy, or, you know, just to be shocking, or meditation experiences where you can temporarily drop the whole subject object thing. But it comes back, of course, in normally. And it didn't come back, you know, so there is this sense of boundaries, borders being taken away. It's a nice, free, flowing kind of feeling in life, you know, like everything, all is one feeling that people can often crave to get. It just becomes like the new normal. And at first it felt a little bit trippy, a little bit, it was fun kind of to go through that one. But then Fetter 7, which is about perception, or the formless, you know, um, what we are seemingly relying on in the formless, which is, you know, that there's this real innate essence of things that make them something, and they are reliably situated, you know, in time and space. That really wobbles your sense of what's the world as you know it when you start seeing through that one. And for me, that started bringing up some real vulnerability, trauma, old stuff, because part of how I had maintained that illusion without knowing it was as a boundary protector for inner painful experience. I'd sort of managed to put everything in boxes, you know, what do you call it? Compartmentalize experience, and conceptualize, you know, experience. And I'd had years of therapy as well. And I thought I'd sort of dealt with all those things that had happened. But dealt is the operative word, because it's like I had sort of cognitively understood what had happened, say, to me or to others in my family, whatever. And then I had kind of put it in that neat box and put a bow on it and made it safe. And I thought that by understanding it intellectually, I had resolved the feeling. And what came up as I went through the higher fetters was I got a very visceral sense of all those protections going down, all those boundary lines going down. And I was experiencing things in a much more visceral way, not in a heady way anymore. And at times, going through seventh fetter, I thought I was going mad, frankly. It's like I was living you know, at times in sometimes when you go through these shifts, they can actually be very destabilizing. And 7 and 8 were very destabilizing for me. They were beautiful at times. It was beautiful at times, of course, because it's stepping more into how, you know, what's really true, not what you've always assumed to be true. Um, so there was beauty in it, but there was also um, a lot of pain that came up and fear and also just complete disorientation at times because if you're taking away the world as you know it, you don't necessarily have anything else to replace it with. It's like you're doing this. Like, do I really want this? Is when it got serious. It's like, do I really want to do this? And I wasn't sure at times because it was like I was going to work thinking, how do I get to work? I mean, it's like I knew there was a train and I knew that there was a route and I knew there was a job at the end I had to do and I could still do it, seemingly, weirdly enough. But often I was like stepping onto a train, not knowing if it was a real train. And um it was a bit freaky deaky, that one. Um, to
Yeah,
use that expression.
yeah. And
Um,
bringing up a very, very important point here, if I might jump in shortly, um, is that it's not all roses. It's
no,
not a walk through the park. There can be phases
yeah.
when there's a lot of old stuff coming up, even trauma, and because you're kind of letting go of all the identity structures that keep them in place, like you said, the boxes, and
Mm.
it's useful to have either someone like a guide or someone you can talk to about it, or
Oh,
if you
yeah.
have, some people need to address it through a therapist, maybe even do some shadow work or trauma
Oh,
work.
yeah. Very good point. Very
So
good point. Thanks you for saying that, Sabina, because I mean, I should have mentioned that, but I did get a lot of support. And I think, so, yeah, and I think it's useful for some people to even take a mental health break at times in this kind of process and actually get some trauma therapy and address whatever is still unresolved that's kind of come up in the wash, as it were. uh, because it can be really unexpected stuff, like it was for me. And I'm sure I know it's happened with a lot of people actually. But when I was doing it in a way, Kevin, it was a bit of an unknown process because it was still, and these kind of profound effects weren't so known, you know. um, and Kevin, who's my brilliant guide, hadn't had that level of trauma in his own life, so he couldn't necessarily relate to what I was talking about at times. But luckily, he had guided Christiana to, who I'm sure wouldn't mind me saying because it's all in her book, had gone, Christiana Mickelberger had gone through a lot of very similar process to me actually. Um, and so he had a bit of a template and he would say, look, I don't know what this is like. So please go and talk to Christiana. And I would reach out to Christiana in those moments. I do remember one of her best interventions being, "You're not going mad." Yeah, simple as that, right? She really understood what it felt like to have that total destabilization and to have trauma coming up and all of that. And she was brilliant, actually, very saving grace for me. So like an angel. She caught me when I was falling a few times, actually. And um, so I feel like I was terribly fortunate, actually, to have Kevin on the one hand, who could hold the process always and keep me steady with a lot of kindness, incredible kindness. And I'm going to cry. And Christiana, who had been through almost a parallel process. Um, and yet she, so she could bring that understanding. And sometimes that was absolutely crucial because, for example, when I was going through after the eighth fetter fell or around the eighth fetter falling, I had a sort of particularly destabilizing, weird experience of a Kundalini um, uprising, which I suppose I have to call it that. It was just an energetic storm, which felt like it went through all the chakras, um, which I had never really believed in much, but until I experienced it, like, oh, there's all this energy down here, and then it's trying to go, and again, it's feel like breaking apart or kind of going off the planet. But again, Christiana really helped me with how to stay grounded and how to um, accept this mayhem and allow this mayhem, seemingly mayhem. And it also helped me hold it in context because she'd been through it and out the other side, and she could point me to other people who'd been through it and out the other side. So that was really helpful. Again, realizing, this may not always be how it is now, because you don't know, do you? If you start, if you're getting energetic, uprising 24/7, it does actually impact your everyday life in the end, because it's hard to get on with normal life.
Yes.
So in that way, it was very helpful to know that um, it was something that needed to happen, to sort of, for some people it needs to happen, but it would calm down, and it did eventually by going into Theta 9, which I guess is sometimes translated as restlessness. So I could put all that energy that was very up there channel it into Theta 9 and 10, and I think it provided the fuel and the clarity maybe to be able to finish that process eventually.
Okay. Before we come to that part, um, I think it's again so useful to hear that um, when all the structures fall away one by one, or like you said, sometimes even several of them, um, experience gets so visceral because all the mental overlays are gone, and so
Yeah,
the body can react with releasing trauma or also with releasing uh,
yeah,
energy phenomena of the weirdest kind, and
yeah,
perceptual changes,
yeah,
and also the nervous system can go really havoc, and it can happen, and it's probably happening at one point or the other for everyone,
right.
different intensity or whatever, and the feeling of I'm going mad now is probably something that everyone
Yeah,
experiences. I had that a lot,
yeah, right.
which is again, it's such a blessing to have someone who can point to, hey, everything's okay. You're
Yes,
going
yeah,
mad, or
yeah,
this will pass too, or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
Or you have someone who's gone through this and you can see they're still functioning.
yes. Yeah.
Life's going on.
Well, there's that too, of course. Yes. I mean,
And
throughout all this, there's normal life going on, right? It's not that you stop
yeah,
doing your job necessarily, or being a parent, or, going to the shops. All that still. Um,
yeah,
I certainly didn't spend 2 years sitting on a park bench or whatever. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? I couldn't afford that because I was a parent of a young kid at the time as well. And
yeah,
so yeah. Uh I mean, yeah, maybe it does involve sort of some people having a bit of a breakdown sitting on a park bench for a while. That's okay too. Um,
yeah.
but it,
That can happen if for a while that you really feel like very dysfunctional in the world, but
mm,
luckily that will pass too. So
yeah, yes, but it's very, like you say, good to know that from other people that, that's where, guidance or friendship at least can really, really be so valuable. And fortunately, there does seem to be much more of a body of experience now of people who have gone through this kind of process, who, they can relate to. So it's not like just shooting in the dark, as it were. It's not just, I think it can be helpful to swap notes and compare experiences, and um, have a group of friends maybe they're also going through the same thing, and you might not go through in exactly the same way, but of course, but it'll be supportive, more supportive than trying to do it all on your own.
yeah.
So
So you
um
said like you were all this all these energetics were kind of funneling into fetter 9 and 10.
Yeah.
So how did that work for you?
Um, well, how did that work for me? Well, I guess I ought to just mention quickly the shift with the Theta 8, which was the inner outer experience collapsing, and that you are, you know, there's just what is, right? And it's such a simple but profound shift, actually, that one, where it's not like there's some place to retreat to in here as opposed to out there anymore. And that can feel beautiful and terrifying, depending that's where the energetic storm actually really hit the fan, because there was no longer anything holding anything in place there, where there wasn't an inner place of safety to retreat to or to hold stuff. Um, but then there is total openness to, on the other hand, right? On the positive, if you want to call it that. Um, and yeah, then it became much more apparent that even without that last illusion, if you like, of like having a ghost in the machine, or an inner refuge, that there was still not exactly like the same illusions as before, but like pulls to want experience to be this way or that way. Traditionally you want things to be permanent, substantial, and ever pleasing, satisfactory. And life just doesn't provide that. It's like not findable. And even in the face of uh, all the evidence that we get every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, it's as if we're still trying to manipulate that, make it so. Like the magical wishing wand. Um, if I wish it, it shall be. and and I worked particularly, some people, it's like people have a different emphasis on that. It's either more that they want the reliability and the permanence factor, or they want the knowability, I know this thing factor, it's safe that way, or it's about finding a place of permanent feeling good, or thinking that you can, right? Or that there is something that will give you that, whether on this earth or not, you know. At this point, I think I found God even. I've never been a Christian. I was like, I was looking really for a place of always feeling good and love, I think, and connection. And at one point, I really did feel like a oneness with God. Uh, and I could finally understand what people were talking about. It's a rather good feeling. But again, it's not, that was more tied up with Theta 8, actually. It was on that boundary line between 8 and 9 for me. But I found that my emphasis was definitely wanting to find satisfactoriness. And obviously, my experience was not matching that. I was having this energetic storm. I didn't always feel good. Sometimes it was blissful, actually. That amount of energy coursing through the body was like lifting me, felt like a foot off the ground. But it could also be very painful and scary and unpleasant and sensitive, you know. And so, yeah, it's learning to, on the one hand, well, I think Feta 9 is really about this acceptance thing, where you come to really look at what it is you expect. What am I expecting here from life that's not happening? What is my radar coming up and seeking for, scanning for? You know, I used to get images of like a hand coming up and trying to reach out for this quality in my experience, and I couldn't find it. Um, So you identify what it is that you really are looking for, and then you just look whether it's truly available or not. And you use in the methodology that I used, it was using sentences that refute it, like saying there's no such thing as feeling good all the time. and you introduce that sentence to yourself, and then you kind of have a fight with it, perhaps, because you don't like it. So you notice, but then you can just notice in everyday life where you're kind of rising up to fight with experience. And I don't mean what's actually happening out there. It's not quite the same as reacting in this to people and things. It's just reacting to how you actually experience those people and things and life and physical sensations. And it was interesting to go into I realized that psychologically, one of my reasons why I didn't accept that things can't always feel good is that I had somehow denied pleasure as well, somewhere in my upbringing, that I wasn't allowed to feel good. So that was coming in. So if you get a repression like that, or rather a suppression, you get the opposite thing, don't you? But I want, but I want, but I want. So on the one hand, I didn't believe I had a sort of deprivation mentality, like, I can't feel good. I can never feel good. And on the other hand, but I really want to feel, so it was very difficult to get that sort of realism for me. I remember Kevin gave me a great exercise. He said, I challenge you to get the best chocolate you can find. And that's easy in Italy. There's really good quality Barati. There's brands. I shouldn't mention them. um, Eat it slowly and tell me there is no such thing as pleasure, because that's where I was going. I was going a nihilistic sort of everything is suffering route, which is of course a misconception of the whole Buddhist thing. It's not that things are suffering, impermanent, or um, you know, not real. It is, but well, the unreal thing is a bit more near the mark. But it's not that there is impermanence and suffering. It's more that you can't have it all the time. So yes, if you eat that chocolate, and then you like chocolate, you'll probably experience pleasure. Nothing wrong with pleasure either. It's not some moralistic thing, anti-pleasure. It's about the fact that you're not going to find a place of ultimate satisfaction, ongoing feeling good. It's stopping fighting with your actual experience, or thinking that you can actually change it anyway, actually. Can you actually place conditions upon your present experience and make it different in this moment? You can try, but does it work? So that's kind of the process of Fetter 9. And then I think Fet is, if you could define 9 and 10, the differences, Fetter 9 is more like coming to terms, slowly wearing down the unrealistic expectations, whatever they are. And you come to a kind of acceptance. Okay, I don't like it, but I get it. It's true. It's true. It's true. And then Fetter 10 is like a real turning towards how it actually is, instead of you stop ignoring, I guess, what you've been doing wrong there, and you just stop doing it. It can come to a stop. It can come to an end. And I think there is really where suffering can come to an end. Um, it's difficult to put into words, really, that final shift, because sometimes you don't notice you've gone through it until you've stopped doing it. you know. And you can have a lifelong habit of trying to, it can take a while to stop doing what you've always done, which hasn't helped you in that respect. Um, yeah, words fail me a bit. I don't know if you've got any questions that might help.
This constant trying to find something reliable and satisfactory and all of that, it really stops when you first see that this uprising against that it's not findable stops.
Yeah,
Because before that, it's like, yeah, I can't find it, but maybe it's still available. I just haven't found it yet.
exactly.
And
Right.
then it's so totally clear, wow, this was never available in the first place. And also none of the opposites.
Right.
And so for me, it was like the question of reliable or unreliable was just, it felt, it didn't make any sense anymore.
Right. That's the thing. I think it's like fully stepping into experience for the first time when you stop trying to go, or it's almost like stopping being a manic depressive and trying to kind of go above experience and go below experience, almost like it's wonderful. It's not right. You know, and you stop doing that thing
Yeah.
where you're problematizing your experience and um well, yeah, trying to fix it in whatever way, or thinking, even thinking that you can, believing that you can change it. That's the, I mean, that was the joke for me in it all. It was like, was is the cosmic joke, you know, as if you could actually make it different to what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's to finally see that you can't do that, and that there isn't actually there's just no way. Um uh is like, well, you may as well step into life as it is then, not as it is in some again, like you reach reality, but as in stopping trying to make it otherwise.
Yes. And like you said, pretty much in the beginning, and it's no problem.
Yes, but more than that, even I remember this amazing like revelation aspect to that as well, like, oh right, it can't be any different to how it is, so you may as well just well, it's pretty fantastic, isn't it, actually? It's just how it is. You know, what you see is what you get. What you get is what you get.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That really is, it has to be okay anyway, but you know, but it really is okay.
Yes, it doesn't have to be any other way. So it's perfectly okay the way it is. So yeah, I
Right.
can very much relate. And it's it gets
Yeah.
quite difficult to talk about
It
this.
does get, it does. It does. Gets a bit subtle, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we still try. So
Yeah. Yeah.
also having in mind that this is all, it's just words, and
Of course.
they cannot relate to any reality, but without
No.
using them, there's not a way to communicate. So we can try. So
Well, sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Always worth remembering. It's that
yeah,
fingers pointing at the moon, isn't it? Uh, but then again, no, what else have we got to communicate with? So, like you say, uh,
yeah,
so
and then also maybe like adding the remark that uh, the things you mentioned, the experiences, the realizations, this is all like what experience feels like, what is experienced. It's not a claim to how things really are, rather than
yes,
how they are experienced. So, because sometimes people then argue, yeah, but you say there is no time, there is no space, but in a there are ways to prove that there are, time and space or whatever. But this is
true.
not about making claims about reality, but what the experience
Yeah,
is like then. Yeah. So just
yeah.
not confuse people and that they start arguing.
No, no. I get it. It's on a
Yeah.
conventional level. It's like, I know, you know, this cup is on. I can use prepositional verbs. It's on a table. You know, but
Yeah.
yeah. What can I really know about that? I'll leave that to the physic,
Yeah.
the physics and science, and
Yeah.
that's fine,
Yeah.
to explain how that cup's on that table. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah,
Yeah.
my experience of it, yeah, I think that's a good distinction, actually.
Yeah.
There is a conventional reality we can point to. It's not that, while I don't experience identity, it's not that I don't recognize the passport photo, and it's not that I think I can use someone else's passport, or it's not like you lose all ability to function in a world that's made up of labels and signs and identifications of all kinds.
Yeah.
But it's more that you're no longer experiencing life from that in that way, or from that perspective of
Yeah.
separateness of um
Yeah.
yeah.
And that brings me to the next questions. Did you have any expectations about awakening, and were they met?
Yeah, I had plenty of expectations, and no, they were not met, but um but that was okay. That's the short answer. I think, as I've already addressed quite a few of the expectations I had as I went along, uh some being quite extreme, really, from various teachings I'd received, like thinking that you'd have some kind of perfect morality as that one went down the old drain, I'm afraid. Even not just seeing through self view, but even after awakening, I certainly don't think I always do things in any way right or perfectly, necessarily. um that's kind of not the point. I think it's yeah, those signs and symbols of what you assume would happen with awakening are always by necessity speculation until you actually have the awakening, because it's not till you know what it is like that you can know. So I think you're always going to have a bunch of expectations which are going to be um dis what's the word, disproved, or uh, disappointed, even disillusioned. So that's the whole point of a disillusionment process, in a way, is partly you're going to see through illusions, but you're also going to see through whatever you expected about seeing through those illusions. And sometimes those beliefs had to be let go of as well, like taking the belief system so seriously. Anything anyone else has told you about, you have to rely on, your own experience in the end, not on a transmission from a teacher, or that there is such a thing as a transmission from a teacher, because um it's going to have the particular flavors that make up what doesn't change, say your personality or your lived physical experience, as it were. It's going to be a different manifestation to some degree to someone else's. So you might look at someone else and say, oh yes, that's how awakening looks, um that's the sort of, or even that's the sort of person who awakens. And it's all nonsense, but it's like you can easily get those beliefs. And sometimes I think those beliefs fed into the doubts that I was talking about earlier, about having the little man on the shoulder saying you can't do it. It was like this idea that or even that, yeah, well, maybe you did something, but that's not really waking up, because it should look like this, or it should be like this. And I had to let go of that idea and say, well, yeah, okay, that's how I used to think it might be. And now I know it isn't. So I got to uh revise the belief system then, at least until I could give up that whole reliance on concepts. So in as much as expectations are made up of concepts, and you've got to let go of all that framework, I think you're always going to have your expectations dashed, but it's not necessarily going to be a bad thing. It might be the very thing that frees you the most, because those expectations might be holding you um in some kind of bondage. Right.
Yeah.
um but I think it went beyond my expectations actually, in as much as I didn't believe I could do it, you know, someone like me could do it. So I think there was an amazement factor in, yeah, oh yeah, even I did that, right?
Yeah.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'd really not thought, after years of trying, and also hearing that, you know, oh yeah, it takes lifetimes and you shouldn't even talk about waking up. It's a bad form. It's impolite. It's you know, it's not a it's it or ironically, how egotistical it is to talk about waking up, right? Um, even if the whole religion that you're involved in is supposedly about waking up, you're not supposed to talk about it, right? So uh you might have encountered that. So yeah, of course, it's you're going to have a bunch of ideas about what that is and whether or not you can do it or not, and they're going to be altered by the reality of whatever happens.
Yeah. So since this is a process that takes down identity, um, perceptual structures, belief systems, deconstructs everything, actually.
Yeah, it
It's a
really does.
huge transformation in a way. So, how did
Yeah.
that affect your life? I mean, like
Mm.
specific areas or in general?
Um, Good question. Um, well, it did, I suppose, have a profound effect in that it caused me to leave the Buddhist community I'd been part of for 3 decades of my life, you know, all my adult life actually. And that was a big number for me because I had come along as a young woman in art school, pretty, I suppose, in some ways quite disturbed, in other ways quite together, whatever. But I had put all my eggs in this basket quite young in life. And so that was the community of people I knew. These were all my friends. And I found myself not wanting to, but I was just actually initially just trying to communicate what it was like for me to have gone through the initial stages of insight, and immediately came up against, you know, uh, resistance within that community to communicating that, because it differed from what we were taught should be the case, you know. Uh, it differed from the teachings that I had taken on, as I was an ordained member of that community. Uh, so at some point, I had fully taken on those teachings of a particular teacher and become part of a community of people enacting that, living it out. And what I had initially thought would be a helpful addition, you know, something bringing something into that, was rejected rather soundly. Um, and so, yeah, and also I think breaking with particular illusions made me realize how the teacher had been caught in some of these through his behaviors and so on. It made me clearer looking at the bigger picture, really, of what was going on in that community, including the more unhelpful aspects, beliefs, behaviors. And so I found myself critical and speaking up, as I had mentioned earlier, you know, saying things that I had probably never dared say, or just questioning and looking for some answers, or looking for some acknowledgement, looking for some and not just not getting the response I wanted, but also getting actual pushback, you know, aggressive pushback, not just to me, but to others who were dear to me. Um, Made me realize that I've got to withdraw from this. I've got to walk away. It's this like being in an abusive relationship. Um, so yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because people do tend to think that if you go through insight, it's something like a Christian turning the other cheek, and you're going to be all accepting of everything that people do and say. And actually, what I found was I became far more boundaried in a funny sort of way, and I realized I don't need to put up with this. And actually, people shouldn't put up with this, or why should they? Um, put it like that. And you become clearer about what's actually helpful to people, um, in terms of waking up and what's not. And if you see that the community you're in is actively in some way holding people back rather than helping them, you're not going to kind of affirm that, right, anymore. So yeah, so that was the profoundest um change outwardly. I guess I lost a whole bunch of friends. Um and yeah, in some ways I haven't built up any equivalent friendship group. I've got friends, but I haven't got that bunch of community. So it took me quite a while to adjust to that, um, for sure. And yeah, redefine who were friends. What was friendship after all, and all of that. But my life in terms of being a mom or whatever hadn't changed, and obviously still looking after a kid, still living with my partner. We moved house. I started guiding more and more. I used to teach uh, English as a foreign language here in Italy, and I just guided people because I wanted to learn how to give back what I'd been given. Initially, it was all for free as well, and then I realized, well, actually, I'm doing this kind of full time. I needed some support here, so I asked for some donations for my time. Started doing it more and more. So that's the outer stuff. Um, I mean the obvious stuff, let's say. But in terms of, is that what you meant, or is that how I experience life now? And I don't know.
Whatever you feel like sharing. And of course, this is such a profound change that there's so many facets to it. And I'm sure we will be talking more and specific
Yeah.
areas about it. But just to give some first impression when you ask about that.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned that you're also guiding people, would you like to share something about your work? How you do that, what you offer, how people can get in touch with you?
Sure. I mean, I don't have a website as yet, but I might change that because people sometimes complain that they can't find me. Um, so it's been word of mouth on the whole, or via other people who are more visible, like Kevin Channel, like Christiana, or Angelo DeLulu in, America. There are various people who have passed people on to me, as it were, who do their own work, and um, basically I started off doing it how I was guided, which was like a sort of regular email exchange, a sort of almost daily email back and forth. And then discovered fairly quickly that people don't necessarily work well that in that format. Some people aren't so good at writing. Some people have physical disabilities and can't write, or it has to be audio, or it has to be written. So I'll either do a combination of emails and video calls or audio calls with people, or um, whatever method really. Even WhatsApp messaging sometimes has worked. Or WhatsApp audios. But what does help is if there's this kind of a regular back and forth. If people want to be guided as opposed to self-guide, which is also a valid way of going through this thing. If they want guidance, then there has to be a kind of back and forth of some kind. It doesn't have to be daily. It could be, doesn't even have to be weekly. It could be someone largely gets on with it themselves, and then but they want to drop in and check out what their progress is. So I'm actually very flexible in how I work with people according to what works for people nowadays. When you start doing something, you do it by the book more, don't you? Or how you were helped. But then I think you find a way that works better for more diversity of folk. So I'm flexible, but it's usually an arrangement where people commit to the guiding relationship, say a month in advance, and then see how it goes for them. And if they want to, they can renew that commitment, if you like, ongoing until they get through the 10 fetters, however that works for them.
Mhm.
So that's what I offer. And
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's great. So we will just put some means to contact you in the show notes of this conversation, so people can get in touch with you and benefit from someone who's been through this path,
all right.
and just offer the very helpful guiding through such an adventure, actually. And
Oh yeah.
and I'm sure we could dive more into the fetters one by one some other
Yeah,
time, so
sure.
people can get a feel of what you were experiencing, and it is a very reliable way that is available to people, and you just have to find out if it's a helpful tool for you, because like you
Yeah,
said in the beginning, it's helpful for many people, but it's nothing is a one fits all. So,
right.
but people can get more information. We talk
Yeah,
about some more. So,
yeah. Thank you so much,
is
Sabina,
is there
for
anything? Sorry, is there anything that you would like to that we haven't talked about, where you feel like, well, this piece should be in our conversation right now? Is there anything you would like to add to this?
no, I think for an introductory kind of chat about awakening and what it is that I went through and what it is I do, I think it's covered most of the territory really. But obviously you're right that you could go into more detail with any of those things, and I'd love to interview you about your process too and find where the overlaps are and where the similarities or non-similarities are as well. Um, but for now, I think that really covered it. So thank you very much for facilitating the conversation, and sort of providing, yeah, the framework and interest. So thank you, Sabina.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you too for being so open in sharing your experiences with the
Yeah.
viewers. And for the viewers, if you find this helpful, if you like this content, just let us know. And also about topics you want us to explore some more. And we'll be happy to dive into that. Okay.
Okay. Bye bye then.
Bye.